Thank you for tuning into Hinton Cast. This is Maggie Block. I am the deputy publisher at Hinton Publishing. We are so excited to be sharing these conversations that we had with authors in the Pacific Northwest who belong to communities that have historically been under-invited to share their work, aka the kind of author we publish. Now, I need to let you know that these are conversations that we had in early 2024. There's a number of reasons why we weren't able to get these podcasts out earlier. The number one being that we're a really small team who are trying to accomplish a heck of a lot. That said, these conversations are evergreen. Don't mind us if you hear us talking about something in the present tense that you now know is in the past. The knowledge, the insight, the brilliance of these conversations are going to resonate with you today. And hey, better late than never, right? Without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic back in time to Marcus and myself. Thank you.
Well, welcome lovers, mavens, and aficionados of literature to the Hinton Cast. 'Tis I, as always, Marcus Harrison Green, publisher and co-founder of Hinton Publishing. I am always joined by my deputy publisher, Maggie Block, who is the t-shirt to my cool summer day. Maggie, how are you doing today?
I am good. Do you plan these out ahead of time?
Or do they come obviously not. Okay,
or they come to you in the moment? Okay.
I feel that the spirit, it just carries and courses through me. So
I mean, I have a very impressive t-shirt collection, so it makes a lot of sense to me.
Nice. Well, the listeners obviously can't see, but your ensemble today is like chef's kiss. It is it is an extraordinary wardrobe choice.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for them that this is not a video.
Someday when the budget gets a little bit bigger. That being said, though, how are you doing in this very moment on Earth that we find?
I am very good. We are about to have a really wonderful conversation with Juan Carlos Reyes, who is our second author and whose book is forthcoming, and I can't wait to dive into it.
Yes, as I always abbreviate names and things, he's just an acronym to me. I shouldn't say just, because he is, but the JCR, it's like very powerful, right? I mean, it's like FDR, back in the 1940s America, when you just knew. It came with, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It came with a lot of things, and some bad things too with that particular person, but only great things. Only great things with JCR. I gotta say,
JCR is like the evolution.
Yes. When I have a quick story. When I first met Juan Carlos it was an event for the City of Literature. I think that Seattle, we were first getting bestowed upon us the wonderful title of one of the most literate cities in the world. I don't know if that's still true or not. But anyway, it was at the time. And, we were in a room of like a ton of writers and, folks who just, love the written word and so forth. And this guy just had this majesty about him. It was just this immaculate smile. He picked up the energy in what would have been somewhat of a dire situation and a dire and drab situation, with certain folks. And I was just like, I have to know this person. I don't know what he does or what he doesn't. It's like when certain people talk about Michael Jordan or Serena Williams walking into a room and there's this air about them where you're like, that's somebody. I don't know who, like, even if you don't know them, that was exactly the whole sort of experience that I had with Juan Carlos. So I cannot wait to speak with him and have our listeners hear our conversation. Juan Carlos Reyes has published short stories and essays with the Under Review, Yellow Medicine Review, West Branch, and Moss, among others. He has received fellowships from Penn, Jack Straw Writers, and the Washington State Artists Trust. And he has won fiction prizes from Quarterly West and Arcadia Press. He formerly served as board president of the Seattle City of Literature and has previously taught at the University of Alabama, the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project, and Stetson University's MFA of the Americas. He currently is an associate professor of creative writing at Seattle University and he is the author of the forthcoming short story collection, 3 Alarm Fire, published by Hinton Publishing. Juan Carlos, how are you doing today?
I love that. Man, I'm just so thrilled by that intro. Thank you so much. I'm doing really well. How are you all doing?
Doing great. How often do you get your bio read to you?
That's only, I think, the second time it's ever been read to me in that particular rendition. Yeah.
Well, definitely get used to it. There will be, many more people reciting, the wonderful things that you have done in life, I'm sure.
That'll be fun. Yeah. As long as I have my coffee and my water next to me, I think I should be good.
Maybe something even stronger. Who knows? Right? That being said, I want to get into this interview by asking you about short stories. You're something of a virtuoso when it comes to crafting the short story, but let's be honest, they are known to be a hard method to master because they're an extremely economical way to tell a meaningful story. So I got to ask you, what attracted you to that medium in the first place, and why do you continue to, press forward and press on with that method of writing?
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed early on by just reading a lot of short stories and sort of diving in myself is that it was a great way for me to dive into a person or a personality or a point of view without getting stuck there for too long. I've only just dived into like novel writing, and so there's a manuscript I'm working on. But for the most part, I think I've enjoyed short stories because I can just embody a person for a little while and then step back and not feel too overwhelmed by kind of the emotional weight of that person. And I've really, really enjoyed short stories and writing them for that reason. That said, I think I write short stories in a way that are completely invested in a person and a personality, whereas I know that I have so many friends or other writers that I really respect and admire that can sort of tell a short story or write it in a different kind of way. And this is just my way of doing it, which is invested in some kind of human being that I make up, that I just enjoy being with for a while, but that I can enjoy stepping back from. I put them in a situation, I let the situation unfold, and I find not necessarily a resolution, but somewhere to end it, and then just sort of take a breather and take a step back, because it does feel like I'm in therapy with that person.
Yeah.
But I enjoy that, right? That I can get to know somebody else that, yes, I have made up, is also an overlap of me, is also an overlap of the world. So I really love it for that reason.
Yeah, it's a way to save on BetterHelp, I guess. As well. But,
yeah. At least for your made-up characters.
Yeah. They never have to pay for therapy, no.
That's good. Since none of our listeners have had the chance to read your book, could you give us a quick summary or perhaps your elevator pitch for why they should definitely pick it up?
Yeah. So the book is called 3 Alarm Fire. It is a collection of stories, of fictions. It is 15 short fictions plus a novella. And the 15 short fictions are divided into like these groups of threes where different narrators are kind of grouped together based on theme or situation. And the idea with the whole collection is that we get to meet people at a crossroads. And the main thing that they have in common is that they're kind of dealing with not just what it feels like to live momentously in the world, but momentously in a world that is sort of very much dense. These are all cities that these people are sort of in, and from beginning to end, you sort of get this sort of notion of these characters in a trauma and moving through it. And then as you get into the middle stories, you're getting the sense of love, right, or intimacy, right, that one way in which to navigate the world of tragedy and trauma is to be in relationship with others and to be and to explore intimacy with one another in both a sense of community and in a romantic way. And then by the end, you're just sort of engulfed in this notion of just kind of beauty generally, like art as a way to process the world, right? And so What I love about sort of the collection as a whole, it kind of starts, I mean, it's always heavy and it gets funner as you move through it.
Yes.
Because there's, I mean, what is tragedy or what is trauma if not tragedy with comedy thrown in, not comedy in the slapstick way, but sometimes the way we deal with these hard things is sort of like finding a reason to laugh as we move through them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I was recently reading a essay that from a Holocaust survivor, and they were talking about how often people come to them and all they want to talk about is the suffering, right, that they've gone through, and they're like, yeah, suffering is a reality, of course, but so is joy, so is love, so is happiness, and to focus only on one aspect of life is to sort of, in some ways, diminish the rest of life. And so, so I do want to ask you, I mean, so many of the characters in your collection are just so richly rendered. So many of the scenarios are very ingenious, I'll say, in terms of the scenarios, as you said, that you put them in. So I want to ask you, like, who or what were your inspirations for how you crafted some of these characters and situations?
Yeah. I feel sometimes like I get too invested in the news, and the news can be pretty tragic at times in terms of the way it's reported to us, right? We can talk about clickbait, we can talk about like just all that stuff, but I do feel that I'm always imagining, a family member or somebody I know and love, or just me, right? In the position of so much of the suffering in the world, right? And then that kind of sends me into a tailspin imaginatively, right? Putting somebody into those moments, but in a way that I can feel like, okay, I can never be close to this moment in the way that others have been, never. But how can I kind of step into a moment compassionately so that I can receive the suffering and the pain, right, that's around me? And so there's so much of these sort of stories were born over my time here in Seattle, because I arrived here in 2017, and for this tenure track gig, creative writing professor over at Seattle University, and all these stories were written here, right, with the exception of two, but they were heavily revised here. They were reimagined here, right, in this town, even though they mostly reflect where I grew up, right? West New York, New Jersey, Jersey City, New York, right? That's, it reflects a lot of that environment in terms of childhood in my early 20s. But they were sort of like revised and bred here, right? And there's something about, I'm sure so many people who sort of are transplants to this city in particular, right? To sort of like that there's something about this place that feels very like it is constantly having me think about my distance from the rest of the world, because we are so removed here. And so there's so much about the fiction that I write. It's like, how do I bridge myself to these parts of the world that I don't have access to? And in so many ways, like, how can I understand that pain and that sort of suffering a little bit more, right? Which isn't to say that like I write to feel empathy, because I know that there's a lot of like arguments against that in terms of understanding fiction as a way to be empathic, right? But well, we can think of that way too, right? It's not like it's a way to empathy exclusively. But we can also think about fiction as a way to empathy, right?
And there are definitely arguments for it too.
Exactly. So a lot of these sort of situations, whether it's like some guy who's an online troll and then becomes an in-person troll after a school shooting, right? He's sort of like navigating the streets looking for a family that's been affected by this school shooting, as he's like toggling through his social media, responding to people there and promising them access to this family, right? And then the tragedy that unfolds once he gets to that house, right? Or just imagining what it feels like with just like these two young people in their teens, and they're on a date, but they have this kind of encounter with the police. And so this police officer that objectifies this young woman in the passenger seat, and the date formally ends there. But they drive around trying to figure out what the hell just happened to them, right? So much of this sort of like is a kernel of life, my life, or somebody I have known, or just me. But it's been expanded and embellished and fictionalized for the most part, to try to arrive at a sense of understanding, and not logical understanding, but emotional understanding of the situation and these characters.
I actually had a quick follow up on that because I was recently came across something that the author Bradbury said, and it was that he was always scared to write certain ideas into his fiction because he was scared that somebody would, that by putting those ideas out there, somebody would, sort of take those ideas and use them for for ill. Yet the stories in Three Alarm Fire, while they are so many, while you present so many, different inventive ideas and so forth, it seems like you were able to balance them with a level of responsibility, right? In terms of, you're presenting these things, but you're presenting them in such a nuanced way that I think the ideas, at least personally, I think the ideas come across in a way of like every single story makes somebody actually engaged in thinking. They aren't prescriptive as much as it is, you make somebody's mind chew on the ideas that you presented, in these stories. And so that's what I sort of want to ask you. Were you sort of cognizant of like these ideas that I'm putting out there? I want to make sure, at least you want to make sure that you have intended that these ideas are things that are attempting to lead to some level of, betterment, whether that's internally or socially.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Because I didn't want any of these situations to sort of unfold, and somebody sort of left thinking that, was the tragedy the point, or this sort of trauma the point. And a story that immediately comes to mind, there's a third story in the collection where, this guy in his early 20s is just spending day in and day out with his sister who's been through like trauma, right? But the whole point of that is like not the trauma, but like the coming together afterwards, right? Like the point is to just find someone to sit with, right? And not look for a solution, not look for an answer, not look to resolve or solve anything, which is oftentimes like so many people's sort of like impulse, right? But what does it feel like to find somebody to sit with, right? If you've been through something, or if you haven't, right, what it means to be sort of like a part of the world that is constantly in turmoil, right? Just find somebody to sit with, right? And so I did craft very like aware of trying to make the tragedy or whatever happens, the plot point, not the point.
Yeah.
Right. The coming together, or the finding someone, or the recognition that you need someone, the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've written responsibly, sir, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So earlier you talked about how there are 6 sections to your book, and I'm really curious about what is the process of forming those 6 sections. Did you kind of like, did you write them in trios? Did you like come up with a thing and then try and shift them in? Like how do you do that?
Yeah. I think there's so much about like the contemporary publishing environment that tends to, like, when you're an emerging writer and you're looking to publish, first, yes, if you're a fiction writer, you want to get those individual stories out. But there seems to be this really cool momentum for a while now to get like the fiction chapbook out, right? So, and oftentimes fiction chapbooks are stories of 3, sets of 3 or 4, right? And so a lot of what I imagined, sort of my time in Seattle so far, has been like, let me just, I never imagined that this was a whole collection, because originally there were like 20 pieces to this, right? But they were all written with like partners in mind, right? With like a set in mind. Some members of the set had to leave behind some of the other members and then I had to recombine them in some way. But just the part of the reason of there being sets of 3 is just that's kind of what I felt the publishing environment was kind of demanding of me as a fiction writer, which is, okay, let's get sort of like small publications out there, and then work towards the bigger book, the bigger collection. And so a lot of these formations of threes or triptychs, they were they kind of came just they kind of just came naturally based on sort of like how I was writing them. And so, like, for example, there's this one set in there which is like kind of this notion of technology and its impact on our behavior, right? Mm-hmm. So everything from that an online troll that becomes an in-person troll, and right, sort of like him finding no distinction between how he behaves online and how he sort of examines the world in real life. But there's this other one, right, where you sort of you take these tragedies of police violence, right? The traffic stop, right, and what happens and ensues afterwards. But it begins with sort of this this woman who lost her fiance, but like she can't stop scrolling through his phone, right? The phone being sort of the gateway into the larger story, because the phone recorded the incident. And so she keeps replaying it, and that's sort of, and the purpose of the story is as much the incident as it is sort of like her wanting that connection back to him through his phone, right? Mm-hmm. And so that story was written with a couple others in mind in terms of what does it feel like to have this thing in our hands, or just technology in our hands, broadly speaking, and its impact on our sort of sense of connection to each other as much as to like bigger ideas in the world.
Man, yeah, that that was one of my favorite stories, in the book, and in a book of favorite stories, that was one of my favorite. That being said, I would want to talk about another one, your novella that's actually in the book called A Summer's Lynching. And grant you, I don't want you to give too much away because we want people to buy the book. And even as a liberal, socialist, I'm just a capitalist apologist like anybody else. But can you talk a little bit more about that story? What went into writing it? Yeah. Its process as it evolved through these years, and where you kind of finally landed on it in terms of the edition that people will see within the book.
Yeah, that was a really cool novella, and I have to thank the question askers and makers right now, right, for giving that novella like a second life. It won a contest a long time ago, but it was like very small distribution, and it was a time in my life where I'm moving cross country, and so there's not a lot of even momentum just to support this sort of like thing that appeared in the world, and so to sort of like pump a second life into it felt really great. So yes, A Summer's Lynching is very much about this inner city community and how they respond to this sort of like man that's found hanging in their basement. And it was a very early draft. It was like my MFA thesis a long time ago. And so it has evolved a lot into the most recent iteration in that, it's a story told in 13 chapters, 13 loops, and each loop is like a different point of view in this neighborhood, in this apartment building, and in the immediate surroundings, whether it's like, somebody that, in the church across the street, somebody in the news department just like a few blocks down, and somebody in the library a few blocks the other way, right? This is very much modeled on, in terms of the geography of this novella, on where I grew up. So I grew up on 60th Street on Monroe Place in West Newark, New Jersey, where there was a church across the street, the library a few blocks down, the city hall a few blocks the other way, and the sort of like the newspaper somewhere and sort of in the vicinity. I forget now exactly where it is, but this is very much modeled on that immediate geography where everything is dense, everything is like within like a stone's throw away, and everybody's just on top of each other in terms of their presence and their business, right? And so the novella is just that, right? The neighborhood's response to this person, and by the end, there's the question becomes who is responsible, right? Which is where you get this sense of a lynching, right? It isn't an exact one, but we have to sort of like question who kind of was responsible for it, even if it wasn't one in the traditional sense. And I found sort of that this, kind of recollection to this like horrible form of American violence, kind of important for this particular book, because it's like the urban environment itself is sort of like this thing where it's a mashup of all different kinds of nationalities and names and ethnicities and backgrounds, social, gender, sexual orientation. It's like a mashup of people, and this mashup of people that aren't from here originally, and yet we can't but succumb to the history of the place that we now live in. And kind of how it's sort of changed, right? You know, you go from apartment to apartment, everybody having a different point of view of each other and what happened. And the one thing I felt like really needed its place was the second loop, or the second chapter, which kind of opens up this line of questioning of like, did we do this? Like, did we do this to this person? Right? Were we responsible for their isolation? And it kind of made sense to rewrite that chapter so that it felt like an indigenous family who was the landlord of the building, right? Right. And that they were talking about these tenants, right? They're just kind of coming in, right? And so it felt really important to sort of revise the chapter to sort of make it, or help it feel a little bit more clear that way. But to go from there, and then the last chapter is sort of like the perspective of the police, felt like, okay, this is kind of the trajectory of like how stories go broadly, right? Where it starts with who is here, and then it becomes to like the authority that wants to co-opt the story, right? And then it's 13 loops because in this sort of, in this old form of American violence, sort of the noose that was used is you just need 12 loops to make the noose, but that 13th one they just always added in because it was the 13th, right? It was a sense of the unlucky number, or just the bad number, right? And a lot of that idea was actually taken or borrowed from a friend's book. So a friend of mine, BJ Hollers, wrote this creative nonfiction book, this examination of the last lynching in America, right? It's called 13 Loops. And so, I went to grad school with him. He's a really great friend. And so having read that book, it really sort of like, it felt like as I was writing this novella, like I could just apply what I had just discerned from his own work, right? Yeah. So I wanted to make sure I get that shout out to him because he spent so much time going from, neighbor to neighbor, right, for that incident, to make sure that he wrote the most compassionate book he could write. But there's so much about that book that's about sort of the mashup of who we are in the United States. Yeah. The mashup of who we are once we get here, that we can't but sort of sit in the history of this place, whether we understand it or not.
Yeah, no, as we were talking, I was just writing so many things down, and just in terms of the wisdom you just distilled there. It does seem so often, right, we sort of regress to the society that we live in, and it's very hard to lift ourselves up out of that, just in terms of consciously many times. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and it also feels like a weird kind of progress, right? Because it's just a new form of violence to replace our old forms of violence. So
we're very good at that. To shift gears a little bit and talk about form, readers of popular fiction might pick up your book and find the writing structure a bit confusing. Can you talk us through the use of characters, not people, but like literally the symbols on the page, and to further express your stories, and how you use the symbols on the page to sort of break conventions of grammar and writing?
So there's so much about the long sentence that I've absolutely sort of adored in terms of like its history and like world literature. One of my favorite writers in the world, José Saramago, from this Portuguese writer, most known for Blindness, but by the time he wrote Blindness, there was like a whole life's worth of work that led up to it. And so he sort of masters this way of sort of tumbling into conversation, from conversation into exposition, exposition back into conversation between characters, where like the narrator feels like they're a part of the story, even though they're sort of like this entity set apart from the characters that are talking to each other. And what I really enjoyed, what I really enjoyed about his work, is that the dialogue feels just like dialogue feels in the real world, which is, I never step aside and say, "Hey, Maggie," I said, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to just play with that, and play with that I did.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that a lot of the feedback that I've gotten, which has been like some people are like, "Oh, I get it. It feels desperate and urgent," and then in that same way, somebody else might say, "Yeah, I get it. It feels desperate and urgent," right? But that's kind of the point where, in this case, these characters, they're so desperate to talk that it almost feels like they're interrupting the narrator.
Yeah.
And they're so desperate to sort of like get into the conversation, because even though the point is their story, it always feels like, gosh, I feel this way all the time, right? Where I know the point of my life is my life, but it also feels like I'm catching up to my life all the time, and
Yeah.
I'm constantly feeling like I have to say something just to make sure that I say something, not
Right.
that I'm saying something because I feel good in the moment. And so I'm not sure if I'm sort of like, hopefully I'm being understood, but basically this notion of these characters kind of living the way I feel sometimes, right? Which is, if I don't force myself to say something, I'm never going to say it.
Right.
If I don't force myself, and sort of like, then everybody's going to talk over me, right?
Yeah.
Because I have felt that way like kind of my whole life, right? Especially sort of like, you're an immigrant kid and you're sort of like figuring out English, and then when you do, it's not kind of in English that everybody kind of understands. Not because I've been told from the kid I never really had an accent. Well, I guess I had an accent. It was called the Northeastern Jersey accent, right? That's my accent. But it did feel that like, I never spoke sort of English that in a way that felt acceptable to anybody. And so like, if I didn't like kind of like at least try to get a word in, it felt like everybody was just constantly going to talk over me. And so I feel like that feeling is the feeling that these characters embody, and I wish I could write a different way. This is the way I feel most comfortable. Like, I enjoy this way. And so part of sort of this give and take with, contemporary literature and just writing broadly is, how do I write in a way that also welcomes an audience, and a bigger and bigger audience every time?
Yeah.
And so I kind of welcome these conversations, right? Because I do feel like there's so many cool things to explore in fiction, in terms of craft, in terms of like a writer's sort of engagement with and of an audience. But I did want to write these stories and revise them in a way that welcomed as many people in,
Right.
even with sort of this nuanced style, right?
Yeah. You're sort of balancing creativity with accessibility, right?
Yeah. And I really, because, it's really cool to engage with people, right?
Well, sometimes. I don't
Yeah. I mean, unless they're
Ideally.
rude.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, you appeared actually with me on a wonderful talk show up here in the Northwest called New Day Northwest.
Yeah.
And on that show, you talked about the desire for women to take away inspiration and empowerment from many of the stories in this book. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So the first 3 stories, but then kind of throughout, one of the things that I really try to actively do, and again, like, I don't think I want necessarily anybody to take away anything. I just like, because they'll take away what they take away, but I wanted very consciously, in the same way that I wanted to consciously sort of have this approach of like somebody being very mindful of who they needed and why they needed somebody in these moments, right? I tried to really write, especially with the first 3 stories and then throughout, kind of these characters that understood their balance with each other, right? kind of especially the male characters, right, that understood that this is a shared world, and that, again, it's about finding partnership, romantic or otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not hierarchy.
Mm.
And that's my hope, I guess, for anyone who reads this, right? That whether it's kind of in the love stories and these romantic stories, or in these stories of more tragic and or even some of the comedic stories in there, right? That there was a sense of the balance of partnership.
Yeah.
Like a very clear sense of people, and men in particular, that understood this as a shared experience. And this is not a co-opted one. This isn't one where you have to find like a solution for, a resolution for, right? This is just one that you have to just share, right? And sometimes understanding that shared experience means you just shut the fuck up.
I hope if there are any young men listening to this, that they are truly listening to more folks like you, as opposed to the like Andrew Tates of the world.
Who's Andrew Tate?
Well, okay, well, never mind. We've already mentioned him enough.
Unnecessary information. Juan Carlos Reyes. That's the only voice we
There you go.
need.
There you go.
A lot of your stories have what I would call twist endings. Why is it important for your short stories to hide the truth until the end?
Yeah. I love that sense of surprise and reversal. I don't feel like I'm necessarily hiding the truth. So one thing I learned a while ago in terms of my own craft, because I feel like I've been writing for a long time, but I never really took publishing seriously. I just really just enjoyed this craft of writing and just understanding what these words can do, and just so much wordplay. But in that sense, I learned right away that it is best to just give the reader all the information they need at every step, with every sentence, at every page. But what ended up happening, the more I practiced that, the more I realized that it kind of works out where every page, as I give new information, at some point, the information's got to stop, right? Like, and by information, I often mean something that adds a new layer to the character or the story. And I feel like that a reader's experience, and even my experience with like a reversal at the end, or kind of a twist, is just me saying this is the last bit of information that adds layers or context to the situation. And then I have to just sort of like wind down. Like at some point, to me, as I'm writing this, it kind of comes like detail overload.
Yeah.
And then, okay, this is the last major detail. That's it. Like I want to wind this down in so many ways, not because I can see necessarily like the end of the story, but because these characters and their lives are kind of getting heavy for me in this moment. And so I really need to wrap this up so that I can take a step back from this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the experience of reversal might be that, because I don't think I actively work towards that reversal or that kind of that twist, but I do feel that, at least from my back-end craft experience, I don't want to hide anything, but it feels like I'm hiding something because I'm always adding more layers to it. And then at some point, I have to say, this is it. Like, there's no more onion here. No more layers. I have to be done with this because this point of view is getting exhausting, like emotionally exhausting, and a little bit too much for me.
Yeah.
And so I have to take a step back.
Yeah. But you literally are giving everything that you possibly can to these stories, which is, you leave it all on the page.
I try to, for sure.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, because it's, in reading the book, it's very similar to how when I look at an episode of Black Mirror, where, it's very, or even the Twilight Zone, or sort of the original Star Trek, where these are in many ways morality plays that are being presented to us. and they're being presented to us with, you know, a level of complexity, and you know, they're trying to provoke thought, you know, in a particularly at a time period where there's sort of a lack of subtlety and a lack of nuance, you know, when it comes to storytelling, particularly when you look at very commercial centric work, right? Which, and I'm not trying to say any of that is bad or anything, but I think something personally becomes art when it has levels of nuance to it. And so I want to ask you, in terms of your approach to this collection, why was it so important to you to have, you know, stories that were thought-provoking and actually stuck, if you will, to the mind's ribcage, as opposed to, you know, somebody being able to breeze through and be like, yeah, okay, whatever?
Yeah, that's probably because I had to work through the ego that I had in my 20s and drop it, and because there's so much about, I think, the way I grew up, where like I needed to have an opinion even at home, right, about something, and it needed to feel certain, like a political opinion, right? I have a lot of opinions, but I think after my 20s and 30s, and certainly after the 2016 election, where I felt like that was the last time where I could engage with people and not feel exhausted in that engagement, right? You know, you had Trump running for president, and you had, you know, like it's just a crazy world, man. And we were living in Alabama at the time, and so it felt like, what else can I say that hasn't already been said? And it was that slumped shoulder kind of exhaustion of it. And I was tired of saying anything on Facebook or social media. I was tired of emails. I was just tired of so much. And I think that really has shaped me and changed me.
Yeah. For the better.
Yeah, because that became sort of like my fiction, right? Like I couldn't just do that. I couldn't feel like I could approach anyone with what I thought was clarity, because I'm not sure that a lot of people are operating with a sense of clarity, right? Or just clear-headedness. And frankly, sometimes I'm just like, am I clear-headed in every moment? So I just felt like, okay, I'm just tired. And so it became this interesting thing where my fiction became a place where I could explore these moral questions that I really had strong opinions about, and that I really had a certain way of thinking. And it always feels like that certain way of thinking is creating a shared environment, creating an environment where, you know, everybody feels like they're center stage, right? And no one person is the stage, right? Creating an environment where, you know, where nuance is priority, right? Where nuance and subtlety is priority, right? There's nothing that, if you feel certain about something, that should just be alarming to you. But I know that there are things to feel certain about, right? Which is like there should be no pain. Like we should work towards not just, you know, avoiding pain, but to actually sort of, you know, working towards like healing, right? And, you know,
absolutely.
And not, you know, and releasing others from the pain that they have in the world, right? And whether that means through electoral politics or whatever. So there are certainties in the world, right? But, you know, but even then, like, it does feel like the way we engage with each other can't feel too certain, right? Like we got to be mindful about how we engage with each other. And so I just don't have that in me anymore. And so that's a place for my fiction, right? Where I'm like, I feel clear about where I am, but it just feels very hard to say it. But my fiction is a place where I can feel clear about how I explore these questions in the sense of morality and the way I see the world, and be truthful to it, even with these characters that aren't me. They're an overlap of me, but aren't completely me. I feel really honest in fiction, where I just can't be honest in nonfiction, or just in just other environments, you know.
Yeah. With that in mind, when do you know that it's time to let a story go? I think most writers, when they reread their work, even after it has been published, they can be like, oh, I should have changed this, or oh, that should be
Yeah.
different. How did you learn the discipline to allow a story to be done?
Yeah. When it felt understated.
Say more.
I had to arrive to a place where there wasn't a firework at the end. Like if there was a firework at the end, I had to keep going or delete a lot. Like that's when I know it's done, when it feels like not stable, right? The environment, like for example in the first story where this mom comes home, you know, to try to put her son to bed, and she kind of encodes this, you know, awful situation that almost happened to her on the you know, walk home from the bus to the apartment. It wasn't the ending of that story wasn't like the ending of her telling the story. It just got quiet. Right. And when I can get to a place where it just gets quiet, that feels honest to me, right? Because there's kind of resolutions in that old, like Ray Bradbury sense, right? Like just don't feel honest to me now in this contemporary environment, but I don't think it feels honest to a lot of writers, right? Like I think that there's a way in which sort of like fiction has evolved, right? And the way I think about fiction and the ending is that I need to arrive to a silence, and then that's when I know it's finished, or I need to kind of work to get there. And when finally my head is a little quiet too, right? And that often means like writing into exhaustion, right? Like I'm not to the point of being tired with the characters, but like, okay, I'm emotionally spent exploring this. How do I arrive to a place of quiet in this situation? Yeah.
So I want to ask you another question on the actual craft of writing. You are a instructor as well. You are a creative writing professor over at Seattle University. Go Redhawks. How are you able to balance, you know, instruction along with, you know, you yourself getting better and your own improvement?
Yeah. One thing I have learned to do is invest in contemporary craft essays. The two that come to mind, one by the short story writer Danielle Evans, one by the novelist Hernan Diaz. And so I try to sort of, especially sort of like Hernan Diaz has this wonderful essay about truth in fiction, but the way he assesses it is that at the end of the day, experience is a form of truth, right? So if you can create a piece of fiction in which you have had an experience writing it, and that a reader can have an experience reading it, then that is what's going to feel true. And so craft essays have been a way in which I have stayed present with my work. Like I will spend a lot of time in the first few weeks of sort of like a quarter and invest in kind of in these craft essays, sort of examining what's in them. You know, even if, you know, sometimes students say, you know, that's kooky or that's weird or I don't get that. And I'm just like, okay, it's cool. I get it.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what I get, but I want to know what you get. Right. That sense of like, I want to know what you get feels really cool to me because, again, I might have a perspective of the essay, but it's not the complete one. And so it's really cool to sort of be in an environment where these undergrads want to be writers too. And so how are they seeing these essays? How are they even challenging my sort of perspective on it? But that's how I stay sort of like kind of contemporary with myself, right? Just craft essays. I will read a lot. I tend to read more in the summers than I do during the school year, during the academic year. But I do take a minute to like always be reading something, even if it's like at the end of a long day, like I'll just read 5 pages of a book, right? Poetry collections have helped too a lot. I don't write poetry. I am no poet, and I definitely know it. But I love reading poetry because it is like a nice pause and breath, right? Whenever you get to like a good collection, right? And most recently, I read Roger Reeves's collection of poems. So yeah, it feels good to just constantly be reading, but most importantly, like craft essays.
So I feel like a lot of times when we see fictional depictions of teachers and students, there's like this level of competition or this level of jealousy that a teacher has towards a student of like, oh, they have the whole world ahead of them, and like, or they have this incredible talent. And the way that you talk about it doesn't seem like that's what's going on for you. So I guess, what do you feel like your creativity is in relationship to your students' creativity?
I mean, it's just I'm in community with them. They're in community with me, right? We're sort of like all in this community of being fiction writers potentially, or just being writers generally. I really want to see them all get published and succeed. I don't understand why there would be that competitive thing, because if as a writer, just like as a person, if you felt like I've done what I've been able to, or I've done what I've been capable of, or I've just lived, right? It's like being jealous of somebody who might travel to a place that you haven't traveled to, right? I'm like, I've traveled. I've lived for me. Like, I know what I am capable of, and I know what I am prepared to do and what I have done, and I'm fine. And I just want, like, all my students to sort of, like, take what they can from me, right? I would love if they just quoted me, but just took it as their own thing, right? If at some point in the future, anything I told them can just become so internalized that they think it came from them, that's awesome, right? It's just because there's nothing more beautiful, right, than that sense of literature, right? The gift economy, right? One of my old grad school professors, this writer named Michael Martone, talked about art being the gift economy, that what we're passing on to each other is this sense of beauty and wisdom, and we give that to a reader, and we give that to each other as writers, right? And to imagine that we're not just giving it away freely is to just be fools, right? Yes, in some way, in a very important way, we're creating books that then are bought and sold, right? Mm-hmm. But beyond that, these ideas, if you can take one and just run with it, I've taken so many ideas and I've run with them.
Yeah.
I try to cite where I can, because those influences and being mindful of them are so important.
Right.
But I can't imagine being in competition with my students. I already know they're all better than me, right? I already know that at their age, I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And so to pretend like, no, but I was doing other things that gave me life, right? Yeah. And that energized me in the same way that I know they're doing that for themselves. So no, that relationship is like, I just want them to just do what they do and do as much of it, right? Yeah. As much of it as they can.
Well, we have come to the last question of our wonderful interview, which is always a question we called apropos of nothing, which has nothing to do with any preceding conversation that we have.
Sweet.
It's just a random question out to you. And this question was actually recently asked of me in a thread amongst friends. And so I want to put it to you, Juan Carlos. Who do you follow on social media that you are somewhat embarrassed to follow? I follow a John Mayer fan account.
Oh
really
my god!
Base white dude, I know, but
incredible.
It's there, it's out there.
But you are not a base dude.
No,
yeah, that I'm embarrassed of. You know what? I don't think I'm necessarily embarrassed of it. I just think they're funny. So there's this account called @DumbDads, and so all they do is, kind of in an environment like this, they're at a desk with a mic, and there's like a blue screen behind them, but eventually when they release the videos, it's just like their logo, dumb dads everywhere, but they're in front of a mic because it's kind of a press conference. It's a press conference after they've done something, which is the kids just came home and there's a mess. And then there's like, all right, so how'd you feel it went today? And so like the reporters are asking them and there's cameras flashing at them. Like, okay, so, talk to us about the play, right? Oh, yeah, they were on the swings and they fell off, right? So they sort of like take this sort of like this moment, right? This post-game moment and flip all that language around to be about parenthood or just being a dad, right? Generally. And I guess I'm embarrassed because I haven't told anybody until like right now. I guess the only other people that know are like my wife and like my cousins, so I just forward this stuff to. But yeah, because I just love that play on sort of like sports culture, right, and athletic culture, right, where you're taking this language of like, exhausting yourself and being on the field and the things that went right and wrong, and then you're sort of like, but you're sort of like adapting it to like the environment of like, as parents we kind of reflect all the time about, what went right, what went wrong, but like here it's before the public, like in these reporters. So I love their account. I think it's the funniest. Sometimes it's so stupid. It's so funny. But yes, I guess I'm embarrassed about following them.
I might give it a follow too. So
I'll give the John Mayer account, fan account, a follow.
Only if you're into it.
Yeah. I will participate in neither.
We're all in our integrity today here. We're all in our integrity today. With that being said, Juan Carlos, it is always a pleasure and privilege to talk to you. Thank you for your time today. The book, dear listener, is 3 Alarm Fire. It will be published October 22nd on Hinton Publishing. Please go out and get it. You'll be glad that you did. And with that ends our show today.
Thank you so much for listening to Hinton Cast. This is all made possible by Hinton Publishing. If you would like to support the work that we do, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. If you go to hintonpublishing.com/support-hinton, you will see the many different tiers of support that you can sign up for. And no matter what your budget is, you can choose something that you will not miss at the end of the month. We want to thank Ben Hunter for this beautiful intro and outro music that we use. We want to thank Michael B. Main for recording the gorgeous audio of our conversation today. And we want to thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at our next episode.